It all started around the age of 5. My mother accidentally put one of my older sister's knee socks in with my socks. It must have happened with static in the laundry. Anyway, I found it in my sock and underwear drawer one night. On a lark, I decided to try it on. I don't know why, but I think that I was intrigued by how soft it was. Maybe I just wanted to feel like a girl. The girls in my family always got special treatment. They got away with murder. My brother and I never got away with anything. It was unfair. My parents wouldn't even be consistent with both my sisters' punishment. My parents always gave in and let them off the hook before they were supposed to. Maybe I wanted to be that little girl who got the special treatment. That night I wore the knee sock to bed. It was so soft, so thin. I just loved the feeling. I felt kind of weird, but I kept the sock. I hid it underneath my mattress for weeks. I wore it at night and relished the sensations. Growing older, the cravings increased. I must have been 9 years old when I tried on my mother's pantyhose for the first time. I was a little freaked by the sensations at first. I got spooked, like when you get spider webs on you. The hosiery was thinner than I expected. It was so soft, and the yarn was so thin. It had a wispy feeling that did remind me a bit of spider webs. I took them off immediately, even before I really got them up my leg. I knew I was doing something wrong. However, the sensation kept calling me back. An hour later I pulled the pantyhose on all the way. I couldn't believe how soft they were. I loved the way they felt. I wanted to wear them forever, but I knew that I couldn't. That was the real start of it all. Over the next few years I would sneak whatever articles of clothing I could get my hands on and my body into. I couldn't stop it. I was so compelled, I'd keep a stash anywhere I could. I would hide panties, hosiery, and eventually leotards in all sorts of places. In all 3 bathrooms of our house, they were hidden under the sinks, on the ridge where the front cover of the vanity was. Many times I would go into the bathroom, strip down, and get dressed. I would stay in there for as long as I could. Eventually, as I got older, I discovered how wondrous it was to masturbate while dressed. It became even more of a compulsion. Soon, I had conditioned myself, sexually, into a compulsive crossdresser. When I finally learned psychological theory, I learned about Pavlov's dog. I had become the dog, but instead of drooling, I was sexually aroused. Turned on by the feeling of panties and hosiery, I found I could no longer stop. I started psychological self-exploration. I tried to figure out how and why this was caused in me. I started exploring my lifelong attempts at self-sabotage. Furthermore, I started exploring and revisiting fantasies of the past and present. I suddenly realized that cross-dressing was only one of my fantasy/fetishes. I learned that I was always trying to engage in all sorts of forms of self-sabotage, and that it took many forms. I had fantasies about becoming a drug addict at the hands of another person. That I lost control to the drugs, and was forcibly feminized by that person. I had fantasies of being indoctrinated into a cult. I felt aroused at the prospect of losing myself to someone else's control. With each exploration, the fetishes and fantasies always went along these lines. Losing control, and not being able to stop. I always ended up with the femme persona. Many of the dreams and fantasizing went along these lines. As time went by, I made multiple attempts to self-actualize at least one of the fantasies I had. More on that later. It was in high school that things started changing. While having fantasies, fetishes, and wet dreams of being feminized, I cross-dressed whenever possible. I'm not sure what type of effects had manifested in me, but physical manifestations are always bound to occur. Everyone knows about psychosomatic illnesses. When an illness has a root cause in a psychological state or problem, that is what it is called. At that time, I had no suspicions. The first of a number of maladies was diagnosed in me as a teenager. During the routine school system screenings, they discovered some curvature in my spine. I was sent to an orthopedist who had multiple X-ray screenings done. They discovered 3 curves in my back. It was a case that bordered on being serious trouble. At that time, the normal treatment for curvature that was serious was the Milwaukee brace. It was a medieval-looking contraption with metal, leather, straps, and restraints. The doctor explained to me that I had 3 curves. As I recalled, one was a scoliosis, one was a kyphosis, and the last was called a lordosis. I'm not sure if the spelling is correct, but if my memory is correct, that is what the curves were called. Anyway, he went on to say that the scoliosis is a side-to-side curve. The kyphosis is a humpback when it becomes severe. The lordosis is a swayback. The kyphosis and lordosis that I had were larger curves than those that are normally found in boys. He said that later on in life these curves could cause some severe back problems. He said that the S-shaped curve that I had were at angles that were closer, but even exceeded those of a normal girl. Well, later in life, my back does give me some trouble. When I returned to school, I had special exercises that were shown to me by a physical therapist to do regularly. The thing is, when you become diagnosed with something, you become more sensitized to others with that malady. I looked around at those kids that were in the same class as me. There were a number of kids that wore the Milwaukee braces. All but 2 of them were girls. One of the boys was born with severe birth defects. The other was a nice guy that I didn't really know. There were many more girls that had back braces. I did wonder, but quickly dismissed it as just some anomaly. However, many times while growing up, my younger sister would tease me. She always insisted that I had a girl's butt. Now, as I said before, I began to try to engage in activities that would facilitate the self-actualization of some of my fantasies. At a place that I worked during high school and college, we would have lunches on weekends with our coworkers. We worked outdoors, and had the food catered in. I would normally find someone, usually girls, to eat with. Most of the girls I worked with were very cute. They wore uniforms with knee-length skirts. They would only wear hose if it was cold outside. Since we worked summers, that wasn't all the time, but we did work at night, too. On those occasions I got to see, and fantasize, a lot more. Anyway, the first time I started trying to fulfill one of these fantasies was on one of these Saturdays, or at least that's when it started. We had just finished the lunch between shows, when one of the girls pulled out a pack of Newport Lights. None of the other people around smoked, so everyone started hassling her so she couldn't light up. One of the girls suggested that we help her quit the nasty habit and swiped the pack, which was still outside her purse. We all started playing keep away, when one of the girls also ripped the cigarette out of her mouth, ruining even that one. She was very upset. By some coincidence, I ended up with her cigarette pack. Everyone urged me not to give them to her. I teased her, and she flirted. There was a lot of give and take, sexual innuendo, and all-round fun. I told her that I promised to hold them for her, and if she had problems quitting I would give them back. She playfully agreed, and surrendered. She didn't ask for them back even the next day. 2 days later, I saw her smoking again at work. When I asked her about it, she said that she couldn't quit. She had already gotten hooked. I watched as her lips stained the cigarette red. There was something sexy about her. We never dated, but I did like her. At the end of the week, I was wearing panties and hosiery under my clothing and had some flats hidden in a bag in my car. I went to a park, slipped off my shoes and socks, then slipped on the flats. The park was empty. I pulled out the cigarettes from my glove compartment, where I had hidden them for safekeeping. I had a cigarette lighter in the car. I pushed it in, and when it popped out I lit the cigarette. I took my first drag, and inhaled. I got up, closed the door of the car, and started strolling through the park. I held the cigarette as I had seen women doing it. I started fantasizing, but felt a bizarre, unfamiliar rush. It was my first experience with nicotine. I felt a little dizzy, like I was drunk. That's how it started. I thought about all of the sexy girls I knew who smoked, and wished I could look or appear as one of them. After that first experience, I felt the desire to become more like this girl. I started noticing all sorts of things related to girls and women who smoked. The news and women's talk shows would report that smoking was rising with teenage girls up through college age. There were many reasons cited for it. Among them was peer pressure, to create a desirable sexy look, and lastly, as an appetite suppressant. Many girls used cigarettes to merely keep their weight down. By the time they wanted to, most girls couldn't quit. I wanted to be one of those girls. I wanted to lose that control, become a smoker, and tie it to my crossdressing, and being one of those girls. I finished that pack of cigarettes, then bought another. I decided to buy that same brand. Later I tried Virginia Slims and more, but I went back to the Newport Lights to emulate that first girl more. I never fully achieved that goal. I never became the habitual smoker, but do partake when dressed sometimes. In fact, I've used smoking as another psychological reinforcement for crossdressing and only smoke while dressed. The sexiest I've ever felt while dressed was with red lipstick staining a cigarette held between two fingers with red-shaped nails on the end of them. Although I like to let my nails grow for a while, it's been spotted too many times by kids and adults alike. I rarely shape my fingernails until right before having to cut them. It's been great for the Halloweens that I have decided to go en femme. One Halloween I did it up quite well. I could never pass, but I did an exceptional job with what has been dealt me. The woman who cut my hair was throwing a big costume bash, and she invited me. I had another party to go to that night, too. So on this Halloween I decided to go for it. My fingernails had gotten exceptionally long that year, and were perfect for shaping. They must have been between 3/4 and a full inch long, cuticle to tip. So I spent the time, energy, and effort to shape and lacquer them. By the time I was done I was extremely proud of my work. I wished that I could keep them that way. When I got to the party, the friends that were there were in shock at my costume. Few people realized that someone like me would be capable of going that far for a costume. One girl who was sitting on a couch next to me started asking me about my prep work. She was flirting a little with me, and it gave her the perfect opportunity to strike up a conversation. She asked question after question. Things like, "I see you did a great job shaving your legs. Has anyone ever told you that you have some shapely, sexy legs? How long did it take you to shave them?" I started to blush, but answered the questions. My best feature is my legs, and I was very proud of them. When she looked me over she glanced at my nails and asked if she could check them out. I said, sure, and I soon learned my mistake. I looked at her face as she inspected my nails. Her jaw dropped, and her eyes met mine. She asked me under her breath, "Oh my God, these are your real nails, aren't they?" After seeing her reaction, all I could do was nod. She was amazed and told me that I did a fantastic job. However, she was shaken and asked me if I was a transvestite. Again, all I could do was nod. She kept it low-key and didn't draw any attention to me. She then told me that she wouldn't say a word to anybody. I thanked her. I never saw her again. After that party, I never did a perfect job on any of my cross-dressing activities. If it looks too good, it raises suspicions. It's horrible. On one hand, you want to do your best and make everything look as good as possible. On the other hand, anything that looks that good will attract undue attention and pique curiosity. It's a fine line as far as how well you can appear. It's a huge frustration to say the least. I continued to live the life of a closet crossdresser throughout most of my college career. On very few occasions would I let someone in on my little secret. Some women who were very close got to know, but rarely would anyone find out. When I started dating the woman who became my wife, I was very open and honest about my life as a crossdresser. She thought it was a little weird, but she said it was okay, because she was weird, too. So we kept on dating. She knew I wore lingerie and hosiery almost every day while we dated and wasn't the least judgmental. She would always ask if I was too hot wearing the extra layers and such. However, I never was made to feel strange by her. I fell madly in love, and we married after 2.5 years of dating. My wife has always been open and accepting of my being a crossdresser. At times she has tried to be supportive. Sometimes she's helped by buying me lingerie for certain holidays. At other times she's made time to allow me to prance, as she puts it, around the house. She's a great and understanding wife. As funny as it may seem, she rarely wears a dress. She almost always wears pants and very little makeup, if any. So she wears the pants in the family, and me, well, we were both fast-tracking it. We bought a house after our first anniversary, and were both in management. After a few years of working and remodeling the house, we decided it was time to start our family. We had a baby girl, and things were crazy. I still pranced every chance I got, but it was becoming more difficult. Being a family man made it far more difficult. So things were getting a bit stressful. We worked hard and ran through a complicated routine, spending one day together each week. It was hard. After a year of going through this routine, we decided to try and get out of that rut. We both wanted out of our jobs and had ideas about starting our own businesses. I really was the first to come up with a business idea. So we decided that I would work on it part-time. I juggled my slate even more. It was even more stressful. Within a month, my part-time business started to exceed my full-time wages. It was time to make my break. I resigned from my job and invested a large amount of money in inventory. I was set to do a trade show the weekend after my last day of work. The stress levels were excruciating. It started 2 nights before my last day of work. I was taking a night class for credit. Once a week we would sit for 2 hours, take a break, and then have 1 more hour. That night something was odd. My legs fell asleep during the first 2 hours. I shifted around uncomfortably, trying to get my feeling back. When the break came, I took the opportunity to walk it off. I walked on pins and needles all the way, down 2 flights of stairs, bought a Coke, then climbed the 2 flights back to class. The strange thing was, both legs were still asleep. I finished the class, still asleep. Went to my car, still asleep. Got home, got in bed that night, still asleep. It was a rough night. The sensations every time I moved were pins and needles. I went to work the next day, pins and needles and all. I called the doctor saying I know it's probably just nerves and all, but the sensations are driving me nuts. I told her about the show coming up, and she told me that she didn't want to prescribe anything, because she wouldn't know how it would affect me during the show. She said she would be curious when Monday rolls around to see if it was all gone. Surely, if it was due to stress, it would subside by then. The show came and sure enough, I was worse. I began tripping and losing my balance. Definitely nerves, or so I thought. The show went exceptionally well. However, my legs hadn't improved. By that Monday, I was getting worse. The sensation started to climb towards my waist, and I had severe problems walking. The doctor had suspicions and called a urologist immediately. He normally wouldn't have gotten me in so quickly, but my symptoms mimicked an ailment that is very rare. Numbness climbing up your body, loss of motor function. Only afterward did I find out that if I had it, there would have been nothing he could do. He wanted to study me. You see, if I would have had that disease, it is usually fatal within days. He just wanted to poke and prod me as if I was a guinea pig. What a comforting thought that is. The long and the short of it was that I had been stricken very hard with a case of multiple sclerosis. I nearly lost the ability to walk altogether. High heels were now definitely out of the question. In fact, trying to put on hosiery was painful. I couldn't stand the sensations of getting dressed. It didn't matter how fine and frilly the clothes were. Everything felt like sandpaper going on, along with the pins and needle with any changes across my skin. The pleasure and solace I found in crossdressing was gone. The compulsion was not, however. I kept up, even though it was difficult and painful. I couldn't stop. Over the next 6 months, many of the symptoms began to subside a bit. Although I didn't dress as often, because of the painful sensations, I still did. My ability to walk improved, though I still limp to this day. I started to learn everything I could about MS. The first thing that I learned, I didn't pay much attention to. It seems that women are twice as likely as men to be stricken with MS. I found that even though men were getting it, it was definitely women who suffered from the disease. I found myself chatting on the internet with others afflicted with MS, and generally speaking, they were all women. The chat channels became giddy and silly at times. Conversations ranged from MS to typical female conversations. Rarely were the channels male-dominated, or the topics male-oriented. As time went on, I learned how to better cope with the disease. I finally came to terms with the fact that I had MS over a year later. The one thing that was important and always emphasized by doctors, others afflicted, and experts was stress management. To that date, the most effective form of stress management for me had been cross-dressing. Stress is a major trigger for exacerbations in MS. It was ironic. Being dressed and more feminine was the very thing that prevented me from being afflicted from an illness more commonly found in women. Years later, I had other major episodes of MS, but for the most part my stress levels have been lower. I owe some of that to cross-dressing. Over the past few years I have discovered more about the disease, and about myself. Also, as we get older we tend to fall apart. My back problems were worsening. I have read all sorts of teachy stories on all sorts of websites and news groups. One common theme was corseting. I was intrigued by the ability to get shapelier while dressed, as everyone does. So I started reading up on the subject. I found out, after trying to buy shapers in the stores, that many men were purchasing them for back problems, or so they claimed, as told to me by salespeople. After much debating, I decided to make the plunge. I bought a couple of corsets over the internet. My wife was okay about lacing me up, and that was a big help. She often jokes that my cleavage is larger than hers in a corset. Sometimes, she even jokes that I should wear a manciere or a bro, as they were called on Seinfeld. After a week or so, we started getting some reductions in my waist. The tighter the lacing got, the better supported my back was. Eventually, I found that when I took the corset off, I found that not only was my back feeling better, but I was also regaining some of the flexibility in my back. I had only had one problem with my corsets. They were not strong enough to hold up to being worn tightly. The ones I had purchased only lasted so long before they fell apart. My back started to cause pain again. If worn, I had far less pain even when I awoke each morning. That was when I had the most pain. Unfortunately, my sleeping habits cause me lower back pain, as does standing for long periods of time. A month in the corset seemed to rid me of those problems. Once again, it seemed wearing something feminine and trying to appear feminine prevented me from problems caused by having a more femininely shaped back curvature. A pattern was beginning to manifest itself. Even I could not be blind to it anymore. Due to the MS, I was getting sick more often. Having MS compromises your immune system, and this was an unfortunate reality. About a month ago, I was really feeling rotten. Even more than usual, I felt horrible. I started having all sorts of problems with going to the bathroom, sleeping, nausea, vertigo, and I woke up one morning jaundiced. Through all of these horrible symptoms, I also had a 100.8 temp, much higher than my normal body temperature. Originally, I thought most of the symptoms were just my MS acting up. I called the doctor and was asked to come in, because the jaundice was potentially serious. They ran all sorts of tests while I was there. Urine and blood tests were the immediate tests. There were all sorts of questions regarding my liver function. When the doctor came in, she told me that I had something a little unusual for guys. She said that differences anatomically make it far more prevalent in women. I was informed that I had become a high-risk candidate for urinary tract infections. She jokingly asked me if I like cranberry juice. She said that she recommended it to most women because it actually does help prevent bladder infections. The MS complications were causing me to be high risk, and I now had to be careful and try to do what I can to prevent them. Yes, one more typically female problem. This time wearing women's clothing didn't serve beneficial. I ran to the drugstore to get an antibiotic prescription filled. It is rarely prescribed for men, and is used almost exclusively for urinary infections. I received twice the normal course, because of my immune system. Afterward, I went to the grocery store to pick up cranberry juice. I found out that Ocean Spray was on sale, and headed straight for that aisle. As I started reading for percentages of juice, ingredients, and looking at the blends, I saw many women stopping to pick some up. I looked around and noticed no men around me. While picking up and examining more juice, many more women came to purchase the product. I started just watching. Tons of women began moving toward the section, cutting in, and going directly for the juice they wanted. It was only women, and lots of them. I was a man out of place. This made me feel, as if not more, self-conscious than going shopping for lingerie. It was weird. I never felt so funked out in a grocery store. Here I was, without a choice, buying something that only women were buying. I really had trouble dealing with this. I couldn't believe that I was in this position. When I go for the lingerie, it is of my own choice. It was the compulsion of a fetish. This was a physical necessity, shopping for the women's juice. If I picked up women's supplies for my wife, I can always say it's for my wife, without lying. This was different. I felt strange that I was physically having women's problems, and had to buy products for them. The trip to the grocery store sent it all home. Why is my body manifesting womanly symptoms? What's going on with me? Are all these illnesses psychosomatic in origin? Was I developing problems due to some type of psychological identification with women? Was my body fulfilling some psychological pathology? Was this all just some coincidence? In general, I did feel better, and had less stress when dressed. I suppose I am getting used to cranberry juice. Can I live with the reality of having these problems? Will new womanly ailments crop up? I have one more week to wait for the results of some of the liver tests that I had taken. Since I have had to wait, I did a bit of research on the internet about liver maladies. The specialist I saw said that it might be the same illness that the football player Walter Payton had. It is very rare, but I think he put it out because 70% of those afflicted with it are men. Of course, he said it might be nothing. I, on the other hand, have my own suspicions. While reading up on it, I found another liver disease. It has similar symptoms, but the numbers are different. I'm almost willing to put money on having it. You see, 75% of those afflicted with that disease are women. It would just be my luck. We'll have to just wait to see what the future brings.